Now I know what you're thinking. Really, Mark? Another Butch Hartman video? What is this, like the billionth one? Oh, don't you worry, my cynical comrade. I've got a long list of Butch Hartman related, Christian-friendly videos coming down the pipeline, so get used to him. And that's because for as much as I like to meme on him, Butch Hartman really did have a huge hand in creating my childhood. I've mentioned it in other videos, but next to SpongeBob, The Fairly OddParents was my favourite show of all time. I would watch it every single day, and it's even what got me into art. Also, if I get any more comments about the way I pronounce furry, I swear to God, I remember I would just sit in front of my TV pausing the Jimmy Timmy Power Hours and redrawing the different characters over and over again. As much as I'd hate to admit it, Butch has had a massive influence on me. Why do I hate to admit it? Well, first of all, congratulations on finally escaping that rock you've been under the past 2 years. Because this man's reputation has publicly sank from a juggernaut of the animation world to a mere punchline when discussing Fallen Titans in animation.
To answer questions from people who've never done anything and they want to criticize, it makes me laugh.
From asking for hundreds of thousands of dollars for a streaming service only to later admit he wants it to heavily promote Christian values, and has yet to actually, release the service. To claiming that autism can be healed through the power of prayer, Butch has shown in recent times that he can be a shady dude, who relies on the nostalgia of his previous shows to garner unbridled support from his fanbase. From the way he was talked about and how highly regarded his shows are, you'd think he's some super talented guy that released hit after hit after hit. But is that really the case? Well, a good thing that has come out of Butch's social media presence is that he's been more willing to show off behind the scenes facts about the production of his older cartoons, and more interestingly, series pitches he made for shows that never saw the light of day. I mean, this is the guy whose entire career and fame was based off of ideas he came up with on the spot, so it's not surprising the dude has had dozens of cartoon pitches over the past couple decades. But despite most only really knowing him from his first 2 shows, Fairly OddParents and Danny Phantom, Butch also had 2 other series that aired on Nickelodeon for a bit, although these ones didn't reach nearly the same kind of success and were quickly forgotten. So today let's look into Butch Hartman's lesser known projects, and see what he's been up to since the cancellation of his last big hit, Danny Phantom. Starting with... In 2010, Nick started hyping up this brand new show from the creator of The Fairly OddParents, and 8-year-old me was hyped. Again, Danny Phantom didn't air much over here, so my exposure to it was mostly from the Nicktoons Unite games, but I absolutely adored The Fairly OddParents, so I was ready to see what Butch had next in store. I waited and finally got the chance to watch the premiere, and it was alright. T.U.F.F Puppy is a show about Dudley Puppy, a clueless, childish dog who manages to get hired as a spy for an organization called T.U.F.F. With the help of his partner Kitty Catswell, who is really popular. The two fight crime and protect the town of Petropolis, not to be confused with the Brazilian city Petropolis. Despite this more action-y setup, the show still aims to be your run-of-the-mill comedy, with very little action to speak of. I guess stick to what you know, but Butch has always had an affection for buff, manly superheroes in action, so it's weird he never tried to translate that into his own creation. Or maybe he did, but more on that later. One thing I was especially excited for in this show was that Jerry Trainor of iCarly fame was going to be playing the lead. I love Jerry Trainor, and he does a great job at playing him. His character in iCarly was always very exaggerated and goofy, so his voice translates perfectly to a cartoon character. I remember as a kid, even though I didn't like this show, I was happy to see it air a lot because it meant Jerry Trainor was getting more work. It's just too bad the character he plays has nothing really to him. He's just your stereotypical doofus character who always manages to get the gang in and out of trouble without much thought. In the first episode they set up that he's like the perfect mix of every breed of dog known to man, but I don't really see the point in that. You're setting up that the main character is like a perfect creation. You think that'd get boring, but no, it doesn't. Because it never comes up again, or has any kind of impact on the plot. What was the thought process here, Butch? Dudley's partner is the best agent of T.U.F.F, Kitty Catswell. She's basically his opposite. She's short-tempered and highly skilled. I actually don't mind their dynamic at all, they work pretty well off each other. And I guess others must have thought the same because despite this show being generally forgotten, she's the one character I still see posted about from time to time. No need to elaborate further on that. The rest of the characters are mostly forgettable. The scientist Keswick is just a furry Professor Frink, and the chief is just the generic strict boss. I think the villains are a bit more unique like Snaptrap or the Chameleon. That's his name. They do a good job at standing out more, but mostly just fall under the same 2 to 3 jokes. Like the Chameleon can turn into stuff, so that's all they ever do with him, and Snaptrap is dumb, so that's all they ever do with him. After 3 shows, you'd think even Butch would be getting sick of doing nothing but stereotypes. I actually like the art style of this show a lot, because it's just the Fairly OddParents style. Make what you want of his current art, but these three shows had such strong and distinct art styles from the norm. Butch's characters always have such strong silhouettes, and his posing is great, they're also expressive. It also wasn't afraid to switch up the art style at times, like with the penultimate episode of the series, that featured the characters getting turned into CGI, which is always cool to see interact with a 2D plane. I also love how they went for that stylistic look in 3D. This wasn't really as common back then as it is now.
Dudley, we've gotten puppier!
Okay, I didn't want to have to bring it up, but someone on Butch's team clearly has a couple fetishes they like to insert in every single one of his cartoons. Or maybe it's Butch who put these in. Explain yourself! Other than that, the humor in this show falls flat most of the time. This has always been an issue in Butch's work, but it only got worse with this one. You know that cliched, "at least it's not raining" joke that's in like every single thing ever? That trope that is so commonly used that it's been parodied to death? Well, that takes up about, I don't know, 99% of Butch's humor. Every single Butch show is just 11 minutes of running gags and then the opposite happens jokes. While not the worst thing in the world, I wouldn't recommend watching T.U.F.F Puppy. I'd be more forgiving if it leaned more into the action aspect of it, but it's way more focused on being a comedy. And when that's all your show has to offer and manages to feel at that, then there's nothing I can really get out of it. Now, while it is true that just because these tropes are done often doesn't mean it's done poorly, but I think it's important to show that if you make shows with these same tropes over and over again, it makes them harder and harder to stand out from one another, and T.U.F.F Puppy really doesn't do a whole lot to stand out. I didn't realize until I looked it up, but this show managed to run for a relatively long time. Like, it has more episodes than Danny Phantom, what most, but not me, claim to be his best work, although it evidently didn't reach or connect with most viewers, as this show is mostly forgotten about nowadays. I'll give T.U.F.F Puppy this though. Butch tried a concept that wasn't just average young boy comes into contact with a magical or supernatural element and now has to deal with it in his everyday life. Butch really is reaching new strides.
Bunsen is a beast!
Bunsen Is A Beast is a show about an average young boy coming into contact with a magical / supernatural element, and now he has to deal with it in his everyday life. It's clear Nick really wanted 2017's Bunsen Is A Beast to do well, going so far as to release a short crossover event of all Butch's characters, only to introduce Bunsen at the end. Was it worth all the hype? Not really. I found a video on Butch's daughter's YouTube channel where she vlogged them going to the premiere of this cartoon, and I would have hated to have been there. Having this legend's next chapter in his legacy finally revealed, then having to sit down and watch this on the big screen.
Butch is a beast! Butch is a beast! Butch is a beast!
You know, that actually sounds amazing. I really wish I could have been there. Bunsen Is A Beast is a show about Bunsen. He's a beast. After integrating his family with the human world, he now has to go to a normal school and befriends Mikey. I want to describe him, but my memory is failing me on what his personality is. The conflict of the show comes from Amanda, the school hall monitor. For some reason she hates beasts and wants Bunsen taken away by the police, despite him never really doing anything to her, but her plans always fail with hilarious consequences.
I will now don a costume, which I coincidentally purchased from a store called Don's Costumes.
Oh look, Butch hired the same composer again. Guy Moon does it again by giving every single action its own little music cue. Bunsen as a character really seems like it's Butch's answer to SpongeBob, about 2 decades too late. It's like he thought, all I gotta do is create a short square character who has an annoying voice and defies the laws of nature and people will love it? I'm joking of course, but I really wouldn't be surprised. It's really evident through his videos that he was incredibly jealous of consistently being number 2.
So the show's canceled, right? And I'm like, well, that's really too bad. I'm like, why? They're like, well, we're canceling your show because there's no sponge in it. And I'm like, well, I could put a sponge in it, but there's already a show with a sponge and a starfish. I can make my show about a sponge and like a catfish. They're like, no, that's dumb.
But that's probably Bunsen's biggest problem. Every character is incredibly annoying. Bunsen speaks with this constant screechiness, where you don't even register what he's saying half the time.
Nice shot, Ivan! Ivan! Because he's an eye! This house just gets better and better!
And while Mikey's supposed to be the street man to this, he's also got a loud, overbearing voice and feels the need to scream every single line. Amanda is definitely the worst though. She's got braces on so has a constant lisp and spits everywhere. That is her character. He delegated his antagonist to a running gag. And it's not like these voice actors are bad at their job. Amanda is done by the same woman who voiced Vicky in the Fairly OddParents, Sam and Danny Phantom, Kitty and T.U.F.F Puppy. You know, I'm starting to realize why Butch's shows have such a hard job of standing out from one another. I mean, really, it's written like every other Butch Hartman show, except his tropes and writing style only gets worse with each one. It's like take every problem I had with T.U.F.F Puppy's predictable humor and double it. The only thing this one does different is that the art style is slightly varied from his norm. I wish I were saying this as a positive. If you look at the artwork Butch produces nowadays, either from his commissions or his YouTube channel. It's pretty clear to see how much his art has deteriorated. This actually isn't all that uncommon. Over time, you naturally start refining your art more and more and eventually start exaggerating certain features like the hair. Look at Timmy's, now Danny's, now Mikey's. Wait a second. Timmy, Danny, Dudley, and Mikey? But you really aren't subtle, are you? Look at his previous shows. Everything is so jagged and stylized, but with his new stuff it's also rounded off, and the colors he uses are super saturated and bright, creating a show that is really unpleasant to look at. That's not to mention it's animated with flash now, so movements are almost too fluid for Butch's style. But at least that means it can match with the Fairly OddParents for their epic crossover. Wait, what? Yeah, I guess one wasn't enough, so these shows had a full 22-minute crossover event. And yeah, Jimmy Timmy this ain't. Remember how amazing that was? Like seeing these two huge cartoon characters come together and battle it out using their respective world's weapons and teaming up to defeat their enemies together. To the point where it's genuinely really nice to see them become friends by the third one. The characters feel like they were always meant to interact. How about we just have a lot of shouting instead? I would add more onto that, but that's all it has to offer. Maybe I'll talk about it more someday, but I really need to mentally prepare myself for that. Modern Fairly OddParents genuinely makes me really depressed. Or wish I were joking. I think we're seeing a trend here where Butch's shows gradually get worse and worse over time. It's not a surprise this one flopped hard, especially with the rise of more story-driven shows like Steven Universe and Adventure Time. Bunsen feels like it should have came out about a decade prior. These shows getting worse is great for me because we're not even halfway there. Halfway there. Halfway there.
The Noog Network. Download it today.
No. Thankfully, these next few won't take long. After Bunsen was cancelled, Butch decided to quit Nickelodeon after being with them for 20 years. Why's that? To pursue his own animation services. The first of these was the Noog Network, a mobile app featuring these minion-like characters called Noogs.
Hey Noog Nation, welcome to the Noog Network!
On the app you could play games, earn virtual money, and more importantly watch original animations by Butch for free. Non-stop access to shows by such an acclaimed creator? That's perfect! What are they like?
Nathan, how's the jar collection going?
Fine, Dad.
So to not beat around the Butch, I am like 99% sure these are all crappy pilots and proof of concepts for cartoons that Butch tried pitching to networks. When the app failed to take off, he started uploading them online saying stuff like, "Wasn't that amazing? I think that was so great. Let me know if you want more of that show. Show your support in the comments." Am I saying this was all just an excuse for Butch to gauge interest in pilots that honestly didn't get picked up because they were awful? I would never. They're all just like the same. Bug girl. Girl can turn into a bug. Family fusion. Boy is a robot. Imagination. It's just Danny Phantom again. It's just Danny Phantom. The most amusing thing about them is that Butch plays like almost every single character.
I don't know. Why don't you buzz off?
Yeah, you're really bugging us.
I'd like to imagine a special kind of hell where everyone just has a pitch-shifted Butch Hartman voice. He's actually tried switching up Imagination to have a more anime influence, along with his new show Elf Detective that he was paying others, or not paying others, to work on for years only to forget about it for Oaxis. I don't see any of these going anywhere. They all clearly lack any sort of vision, with Butch not really being set on an idea or concept, and will change them on a whim. Like when he wanted to make a show about superhero rats called Dynamice, with this more action-heavy approach, then the executives told him to make it more cartoony and he bent to their will. Despite him criticizing the Teen Titans Go staff for the exact same thing.
Years ago, if Cartoon Network had come to me and said, "Hey Butch, we want you to make Teen Titans into a cartoon," I would have said, "Cool, awesome." And then they would have said, "We want you to make it a comedy," and I would have said, "No."
You may be wondering if any of Butch's shows post Danny Phantom had any modicum of success. Well, surprisingly, yes. HobbyKids is Butch Hartman's collaboration with one of those dumb kids channels that are run by controlling parents who exploit their children for views, and more importantly, money. I guess they decided making a cartoon was the next logical step, and now here we are. A baby show. The designs of the main three kids aren't awful, but that's kinda where my thoughts on the show ends. I'm mostly just disappointed that this is what kids grew up with now. It features such amazing plot lines as going to the gamer cave, or even an entire episode sponsored by Carl's Jr., where characters will stop for a few seconds to talk about how amazing Carl's Jr. is. Wow, that sure is a long line. Carl's Jr. must make pretty amazing burgers. They make the best hamburgers in the universe. Honestly, imagine stopping your show just to disrupt the pace by promoting a product. What? I'll give HobbyKids some credit though. If it weren't for its creation, I would have never gotten to meet Butch Hartman in person at VidCon last year.
Subscribe to LS Mark.
I was actually told he would have been going this year too, but sadly the world was against me and decided to cancel it. Maybe it wasn't meant to be. Anyways, it looks like the HobbyKids channel is kind of dying now, so I don't see them thinking it's worth it to pay Butch for more episodes. And thus he had to go out and find another thing to do while bathing in his riches.
The garden we want to grow with you.
This is like brand new, and I think other people are going to be talking about this sooner or later, so I'll keep it short, mostly because its backstory is way more interesting than the show itself. Butch Hartman is pretty open now about his Christianity. He started a new show called The Garden, which is exclusive to a Christian service where you can purchase every episode for the low price of $130. And by every episode I mean 6 episodes that are around 5 minutes in length. The show is about this lion and lamb with very phallic hands, living in the garden and doing tasks granted to them by the boss, this all-knowing voice in the clouds. Child slavery. This is very subtle, Butch. I definitely cannot tell what this is all referring to. Even more than HobbyKids, it's apparent this is made for really young children, teaching lessons like, tell the truth. I think this would be pretty noble of Butch if there were, let's say, free YouTube shorts. I mean, they look about that quality. We even get a special cameo from the man himself, Butch Fightman.
Hello there!
They were animated by around 3 people, leading me to believe they had a really low budget. They probably could have afforded to pay a couple more if Butch didn't feel like hiring Guy Moon again. Jesus Christ, Butch pays this man to compose his entire life. I'm sorry I used the Lord's name in vain, Butch. Turns out that none other than Terminal Montage actually helped animate these. It's not that surprising since he also helped with some of the Noog Network animations, but it's interesting nonetheless. I joke around about him a lot and will continue to do so, but to be real for a second, it's honestly incredibly disheartening seeing Butch's many public meltdowns. Seeing the guy who created one of your main influence consistently showing again and again just how low he can go. Judging by how many hits he's had compared to misses, should we accept at this point that Fairly OddParents and Danny Phantom were just a fluke, and only good because Butch got the right people to work on it and flesh out his ideas into something great, and once his ego grew, surrounded himself with yes men who didn't challenge his ideas no matter how bad they were? I'll let you decide. So yeah. Pekuro.